we're talking about protein, right? And we know that protein needs to be high quality protein. And there's a concept called crude protein, and I believe true protein. Is there a big difference? And is this something that we need to pay a watch on and focus a little bit more on when we are looking at those labels and trying to consume a higher protein diet for whatever reason?
Oh, absolutely. Crude protein is an estimate, and it's based on the percent nitrogen that's determined through a chemical analysis. And then that number for percent nitrogen is multiplied by a factor, 6.25 in this case, to convert it from percent nitrogen to percent crude protein, based on the assumptions that all the nitrogen was in protein and all that protein was 16% nitrogen. That's a very old estimate. We've used it since, I think, 1880s. We have lots of data. It works okay with ruminants because ruminants, because of the microbes in their large rumen, are able to capture that non-protein nitrogen and convert it into microbial protein. And then the cow host digests the microorganisms and the protein that they contain. So it's a really essential process in the environment. It's a fundamental process in food systems. We're not ruminants. We can't do that. So we have essential amino acids that we must have in our diet. We can't manufacture them.
Question, just for the audience, what are ruminants? Cows, sheep,
Oh,
goats?
exactly. So these are those animals, as you mentioned, but we could add buffalo, bison, antelope, deer, moose, and they have cloven hooves. They have a multi-compartmented stomach. And so they are perhaps the most specialized of the herbivores. A horse is an herbivore, for example, but they're not a ruminant. And so ruminants are able to make best use of the fiber in plants. Again, thanks to the anaerobic pre-gastric fermentation that takes place in their rumens. So they do not have any such thing as an essential amino acid in their diet. We do. And there's even some question about, well, there's also, so we have indispensable or essential amino acids. We have some that are now being called conditionally essential. So if we get things just right for whatever reason, then maybe this amino acid that we used to be able to make enough of, we think, now becomes essential when before we would have put it in the non-essential category. And there's even some question about whether if we had these most artificial diets, whether we would be able to make enough of any of the essential amino acids if it was completely lacking from our diet. It's a question that's out there, but traditionally we talk about essential and non-essential amino acids.
How does processing of protein affect the quality? And is there a difference between when a plant-based protein is processed versus an animal-based protein that is processed?
Absolutely. So one last point to make regarding your previous question. So because of how we calculate crude protein, that number will include both true protein and non-protein nitrogen, right? So some of the nitrogen that in that analysis or that calculation we convert by multiplication into crude protein came from protein nitrogen, and some comes from non-protein nitrogen. And typically the difference between true protein and crude protein is going to be greater in plant source foods than it's going to be in animal source foods. And then to your last question about the effect of processing, as I mentioned, if we take wheat, for example, which is already limiting in terms of its lysine content, when we process that into whole wheat bread or something brown and crispy like a cracker or a cookie or breakfast cereals, we are actually, part of that process is actually combining the lysine with sugar in a way that makes the lysine completely unavailable to us. And so in the case of some cereals, for example, we have made essentially all of that lysine unavailable. Now, if someone were to put real dairy on that breakfast cereal, not recommending, but just let's say, then there would be sufficient lysine provided by the real dairy to meet the requirements to be a good, protein source as a meal. Now, what would happen if we utilized, say, a plant juice beverage of some kind? Well, that's an unknown at this point because the work hasn't been done. But a lot of these analog products are being sold based on their crude protein content. And they're saying, oh, look, there's enough here, it's equivalent, whatever. Well, maybe, maybe not. We have reason to suspect that it's not. Again, that's merely in the amino acid composition. And then there are other compounds that we need to look at. And we have to also be aware that we don't merely ingest the amino acids, right? We get all this other range of nutrients, essential in the case of animal source foods, anti-nutrients in the case of many plant source foods. So when we eat seeds, nuts, and legumes, for example, we can get a lot of phytate. In the graphic that you showed earlier, as you pointed out, we were getting a lot of calories from some of these other sources. We're also getting a lot of carbohydrate. And that would be something that would be of concern to someone who might be interested in reducing their insulin level, to improve their insulin sensitivity, to access their fat stores so that they could lose excess body fat, etc. So there's a lot of things going on here that too often the conversation, it seems to me, gets a little oversimplified.
No, precisely.
And
Yeah.
and the final point is, you probably don't have to worry about this if you're eating an omnivorous diet, right? If
Yeah.
you're, eating an appropriate amount of protein coming from an animal source food, then the rest of this just becomes really not that important, provided that, if you're eating the non-starchy vegetables as a complement to sufficient animal source protein as part of your meal, then worrying about the digestible, indispensable amino acid score probably isn't something you have to worry about. But if you're
Exactly. Yeah,
thinking
you could
that
have a balanced diet. If you go for a more of a balanced diet, it should be reasonable for a lot of people. Exactly right.
Mhm, mhm.
Right. But the point
But if you're
of the
going to exclude animal source foods, then it becomes, I think, a real challenge.
right, and definitely you can see that. Thanks for watching, and I appreciate you as a valuable viewer. And if you liked this segment, you can watch all of the different individual segments or the whole podcast to have a broader understanding on this topic. And just check the links in the description or what you see on the screen right now. I'm Dr. Umer Khan. Looking forward to seeing you again. Thank you.